last time, and it's just we're going to start off sort of halfway through, but just to give a quick little review, I'm just going to see if I can move. That's just gone where I don't want it to go. Just trying to move something. Okay. Can you see a banner at the top that says a prophecy for a non-existent nation?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. I can't. I don't know why, but good. Okay. This is the curious thing about the prophecy of Nahum. It was given at a time when Israel had already been taken into captivity. Israel's gone. There is no Israel. They've been taken into captivity. They've been taken by the Assyrians. Some be taken to Assyria. Some have gone further over to Persia. They're not there. And yet the prophecy of Nahum is full of statements. God will protect you. God will look after his people, Israel. God will destroy the enemies. And it's just a curious thing that they must have sat there and thinking, well, that didn't work. We're being destroyed. We don't exist anymore. There is no Israel. And so a lot of it has got to be looked at in the view of end time, when finally all of God's people, and that would be spiritual Israel, is gathered together and enjoy these blessings. This is a relief from one of the Assyrian kings, one of the panels of the Assyrian kings. And you can see, I'm going to see if I can get a little pointer here. Hang on a minute. You can see that this actually is a description of the taking of the people of Israel. And these are the slaves or the people of Israel who are now being used as beasts of burden. And these are the Assyrians, their overlords. I can't understand why the Assyrians are all in wheelchairs, but still, I guess there's some reason for that. This is the actual dispersion of the people of Israel. They were taken from this area here, which is in Samaria, and they were taken in a number of tranches, sort of thing, I guess two main ones. The first one by Tiglath-Pileser and then by Shalmaneser and Sargon II. They were taken in captivity well before Nahum made his prophecy. So by the time Nahum's prophecy turns up, they're gone, the place is empty. So what happens is they're taken by, always like this map, because try to, in your mind, superimpose the journey of Abraham. Abraham started down here in Sumer. It's a bit hard for me. I'm just going to try to move my tiles. Okay. Sumer would be about here and Akkad would be about there. So that's where Abraham starts, and he goes up here, up to Haran, where he stays for a while, where Terah dies, and then they come down to Canaan. And when the people of Israel betrayed God and effectively said to God, we don't want your promise, we don't want this land flowing with milk and honey, look where God takes them. He takes them right back to where Abraham came from. He sends them right up back here, and this is where Haran is, up here. So they've been rejected. Because they rejected God, he's rejected the promise. They've gone back up to Haran up here. And when it becomes Judah's time to be taken into captivity by the Babylonians, where are they taken? Right back to where Abraham came from. Right back, almost undoing the promises, saying you didn't want it, it was offered to you, so it goes back. And then the rest of the story is encapsulated in, I guess, Galatians 3, where Paul says, we are the children of Abraham. It is us in Jesus Christ. The true Christians are the children of Abraham, and we are the heirs of the promise. Okay. Chapter 1, we did do this last time, but just to look carefully at what was said last time, the first chapter is a generalization. It basically says God is in control of everything. God will defeat his enemies. Israel will be safe from its enemies. And obviously, you've got to look at this as an end time prophecy, because Israel was not safe from the enemies. In fact, there would be a lot of Israel that were lost forever. I mean, there's always been an argument about where the 10 tribes of Israel went. And I would say that very likely most of them have been blended in amongst the nations now. Certainly a lot of them went down to Judah and stayed in Judah, and a lot of them went across in the Judean captivity. But many of them that were taken just lost. Chapter 2 of Nahum is a specific judgment on Nineveh, where it specifically says that Nineveh, that great city, will be brought low, be brought down, because of its evil and because of its overreach on the judgment of the people of Israel. And then chapter 3 of Nahum talks about the judgment on all of Assyria, because Nineveh was, in fact, wasn't always a capital. The capital of Assyria moved back and forwards a bit. In the time of Jonah, although Jonah went to Nineveh, that was not the capital of the Assyrian Empire. It was at a place called Nimrod or Nimrud, and that's where the capital was. But nonetheless, Nineveh was the largest and biggest and most prosperous city there. But the judgment on Assyria is simply a judgment on them because they overdid their duty of punishing Israel, and also they were excessively cruel. Okay, this is the start of the book of Nahum. It starts off, the first sentence is not the prophecy. The first sentence is just an introduction. The burden against Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. Last time we said Elkoshite means from Elkosh, which is a city still in Assyria. If you go to Mosul today, and which is the old Nineveh, about 40 kilometers north, there is this town of Elkosh, and apparently, I think that's the best guess, is that's where Nahum came from. So that's the introduction, but that's not the prophecy. The prophecy starts in verse 2, and the whole prophecy never mentions Nineveh or Assyria, which is really nice, because what it's saying is, for all people, everywhere, not just Israel, always, God avenges those that reject him, and God is always protective of those who love him. God is jealous, the Lord avenges and is furious. The Lord will take vengeance on his adversaries. He reserves wrath for his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. And that's the introduction that we get to a general statement. And of course, we said last time, Lord is slow to anger and great in power. That's what God described himself as when he spoke to Moses. So it comes out to be exactly God's words describing himself. Okay, now we're going to move on. I'm got things missing here. I can't see under there, but I guess that says Nahum 2, does it?
Yep.
Yes, that's good. I can't see it for some reason. I've got a little banner that says, okay, leave the meeting, and I don't want to. Okay. It says, he who scatters it come up before your face. Man the fort, watch the road, strengthen your flanks, fortify your power mightily. The Lord will restore the excellence of Jacob, like the excellence of Israel, for the empties have emptied them out and ruined their vine branches. And just that, the Lord will restore the excellence of Jacob, I think is a beautiful statement, because their excellence had been destroyed. They're gone. There is no Israel. The excellence of Israel doesn't exist, but it does in God's heart, because we are Israel. And in the final time, when Jesus comes back to earth and the fullness of this prophecy finally happens, it is those who believe in his son, Jesus Christ, who will be the spiritual Israel. And those are the ones who will share in the excellence of Jacob, just as been promised here. There's a little statement here in verse 6. The gates of the rivers are opened and the palaces dissolved. It is decreed, she shall be led away captive. She shall be brought up. That statement, the gates of the rivers, some people have associated with the way in which Nineveh fell, the way in which it was taken. There's an artist's impression. I don't think that's the real thing, but that's what they guess Nineveh looked like. It's on the banks of the Tigris River. And all, of course, great capitals or great cities in the ancient world had to be near a river because they needed a water supply. Some of them actually had gates in which part of the river flowed through. But it was certainly true that in Egypt, all the great cities were on the Nile. Here, that was on the Tigris. And there is a story from ancient times that the way in which this city was taken was that the river was dammed, and damming the river either deprived the city of water, or when you had it, the dam was an enormous amount of water, and you break the dam, a flood comes through and floods the city. Either way, it was in that particular ancient writing, whoever did it, that described the way Nineveh fell. And that's possibly an allusion here to the gates of the rivers are opened, maybe. But most authorities think that, in fact, that description by the ancient writer is something made up years later and, in fact, wasn't true at all. So we don't know whether that's true. The city was completely destroyed, and I think probably one of the saddest things was the library of Ashurbanipal. It was a magnificent library, from what the records say, containing over 30,000 books, all in the form of clay tablets, I would assume, and that's an awful lot of clay tablets. If you think of 30,000 books, I don't know whether a book means multiple clay tablets or just one, but some of it survived, and that's where we get things like the Epic of Gilgamesh. That came from there, and the Enuma Elish was the ancient Babylonian or Assyrian stories of creation, etc. So those things have survived, but as in most places, when they are plundered and destroyed, even the good things are destroyed with them. Okay, now what does the top say here? Is there a heading I'm missing here? It says, he who scatters to come up before your face. Is that what it says? Okay,
Yes.
good. Okay. They've got these little staccato phrases: man the fort, watch the road, strengthen your flanks, fortify your power mightily. We're going to see a bit more of this in the next chapter, but it's really interesting to see that this whole thing is a poem. All of Nahum has been written poetically, and this form of poem, which I'll talk about in the next slide a bit more, is in fact a very common form which is still used to this day. And those of you who know my penchant for poetry will know that Gerard Manley Hopkins is my favourite English poet, and I'll give you a reference to that as well with this same technique. He says, behold, I am against you. This is to Nineveh, says the Lord of hosts. I will burn your chariots in smoke. The sword shall devour your young lions, and I will cut off your prey from the earth. The voice of your messengers will no longer be heard. So that's his description of the destruction. Now, you'll notice when you read through chapter 2, there's a repetitive emphasis on lions. Again, I might have my top line missing, I don't know, but it says, the feeding place of the young lions, where the lion walked, the lioness and the lion's cub. No one made them afraid. The lion tore in pieces, enough for his cubs, killed for his lioness, and so it goes on. So God talks about the destruction, but keeps calling them lions. And it's probably fairly common knowledge that everybody in the ancient world looked at the lion as a symbol of strength. And every nation liked to have lions as their symbols because the lions were the king of the jungle or whatever, and they represented the strength of the nation. Assyria was no different. Babylon was the same. In fact, even in Daniel, the lion is used for Babylon. But Babylon is, as well as Assyria, used the lion as their symbol. Here's a couple of Assyrian carvings that use the lion. It was a tradition for all Assyrian kings, as a part of their coronation, to go on a lion hunt. And I guess if the king came back, he was king. And if he didn't, well, they had another king. But the fact is they had to fight a lion. Here's a lion. You can see, looks like the first arrow did its job, got him in the head. And then I always can't understand this part here. It looks like the king is shaking the lion's hand. Looks like there's an arm coming down the back and the king has got it and he's shaking his hand, but I'm sure that's not true. But this is a symbol, again, of strength. And it just basically means is you were the lion, you were the strength, but you'll be brought down. Just a matter of interest. Asian lions up through Israel and through Iraq and Iran were obviously common in the old days. If you go back to the Old Testament, there are many references to lions covering the whole country, and they went right up through as you over to Persia. When you stop to think about it, you sort of think, well, I guess they were all killed by the Romans, because the Romans had this thing about catching lions or wild animals and having them in the circuses. The fact is that the lions kept on going, and they were there till the 1900s. It was in 1912 when the last Asian lion was shot. And that's how to preserve a species. As soon as you find the last one, you shoot it. But the fact is that the last lion was shot in 1912 in Iraq. It amazes me that the lions were right through those countries for the last 2,000 years or 2,500 years. Always used as strength. Can anybody remember what the British coat of arms is? It's a lion and a unicorn. The unicorn's fictitious, doesn't exist. That's pretty well a good description of the British Empire. And there's the lion, which represents the strength, which is also not in Britain. So at least Australia's got what have we got? A kangaroo and an emu, haven't we? So, at least we've got real animals. Not very fierce, I would say. I don't think anybody's scared of an emu, but maybe. Anyway, that's what Britain has. Just another little fact about lions, which I find really interesting. When God did take Israel away and sent them into captivity and pushed them out towards Persia, etc., lions invaded the land. In 2 Kings, we're told that lions came in and roamed through the cities and were killing people. I can't do a talk without a lion and a Donald Trump line. The lions were eating the cats and eating the dogs and eating the pets. The fact is that lions were eating people. The lions were just eating everybody. And so the king of Assyria said, find a priest of the people of Israel and send that priest back to teach the people the ways of their God. And when they worship their God, he'll send the lions away. Really odd, because remember, this land had all sorts of people from other nations had been brought in. Ashurbanipal had brought in people from every other nation, some Moabites, some Ammonites, brought them in. And of course, that was the embryo of the group of Samaritans that the Jews despised, because these people were just mixed up from all other nations, plus some Jews. Where did he find a priest? Where was the king of Assyria going to find a priest? Israel had been worshipping the golden calves for centuries. I don't know where he got a real priest. When Josiah was told in the temple there was a book of the law, he said, we've never seen this. This is new. Josiah found this book of the law and repented when he read it because of all. So how did they have the correct commandments of God? Must have. So I guess they found a priest who had kept all these faithful things in his heart. And he went there and he preached the Bible. I don't think it concludes by saying what happened to the lions, but I guess they all went away, which is a curious story. 2 Kings also tells us that these people all had different gods. The Moabites brought their own god, the Ammonites brought their gods, the Edomites brought their gods. So there's all these mixed up different worships in the land of Israel, which is going to be called Samaria soon. And yet the strangest thing is that they all congregated to the worship of Yahweh, which is really strange. Every story you hear at Sunday school is whenever you mix goodies and baddies, the people always end up with the baddies. If you bring in the wrong worship, it's much more fun, I presume, worshipping Baal and Ashtaroth than it is worshipping Yahweh. But the people all gravitated to Yahweh. And by the time you get to the New Testament, the Samaritans were absolutely faithful worshippers of God. We know from the woman at the well who talked to Jesus. She said, in this mountain we worship God, on Mount Gerizim. And of course, that is in the Torah of the Samaritans. The Samaritans have got their own law. It's almost identical to the Jewish, and the Samaritans still exist to this day. The last I saw, which was probably about 10 years ago, there's only about 1,000 Samaritans left. And it's just a little interesting comment. The Samaritans today live in between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. They live in what used to be Shechem, but it's now, can't remember the name. Someone can yell it out for me. But it used to be the old Shechem in between those two mountains. And that's where the Samaritans are today. And about 10 years or 20 years ago, they started to run out of women. I don't know why, just had too many boys. And they sent to a European country to have some women sent over as wives. and the country was Ukraine. So they got Ukrainian wives. And all I can say is that Ukraine must be a pretty horrible country if you want to leave it to go and live in Palestine. But that's what happened. A lot of these young girls went over to live in Palestine, and they were taken as wives by the Samaritans. And to this day, the Samaritans are incredibly faithful. They have this huge ceremony around the Passover. They have a huge ceremony about slaying the lamb, etc. And they are very passionate followers of what we would say is the Torah. Okay, the lions came into Samaria, and it looks like the lions all went. Okay, now I think I'm up to, does that say Nahum 3? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, Joe, could you read it for us?
Yes, and you want the whole chapter, don't you, John?
The whole lot.
Yeah.
That'll take up some of my
Okay.
time.
Well, the heading is Woe to Nineveh. Woe to the city of blood, full of lies, full of plunder, never without victims. The crack of whips, the clatter of wheels, galloping horses and jolting chariots, charging cavalry, flashing swords and glittering spears. Many casualties, piles of dead bodies without number, people stumbling over the corpses, all because of the wanton lust of a prostitute, alluring the mistress of sorceries, who enslaved nations by her prostitution and peoples by her witchcraft. I am against you, declares the Lord Almighty. I will lift your skirts over your face. I will show the nations your nakedness and the kingdoms your shame. I will pelt you with filth. I will treat you with contempt and make you a spectacle. All who see you will flee from you and say, Nineveh is in ruins. Who will mourn for her? Where can I find anyone to comfort you? Are you better than Thebes, situated on the Nile with water around her? The river was her defence, the waters her wall. Cush and Egypt were her boundless strength. Put and Libya were among her allies. Yet she was taken captive and went into exile. Her infants were dashed to pieces at every street corner. Lots were cast for her nobles, and all her great men were put in chains. You too will become drunk. You will go into hiding and seek refuge from the enemy. All your fortresses are like fig trees, with their first ripe fruit. When they are shaken, the figs fall into the mouth of the eater. Look at your troops, they are all weaklings. The gates of your land are wide open to your enemies. Fire has consumed the bars of your gates. Draw water for the siege. Strengthen your defences. Work the clay, tread the mortar, repair the brickwork. There the fire will consume you. The sword will cut you down. They will devour you like a swarm of locusts. Multiply like grasshoppers, multiply like locusts. You have increased the number of your merchants till they are more numerous than the stars in the sky. But like locusts, they strip the land and then fly away. Your guards are like locusts, your officials like swarms of locusts that settle in the walls on a cold day. But when the sun appears, they fly away and no one knows where. King of Assyria, your shepherds slumber, your nobles lie down to rest. Your people are scattered on the mountains with no one to gather them. Nothing can heal you. Your wound is fatal. All who hear the news about you clap their hands at your fall. For who has not felt your endless cruelty?
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, again, there's a reference there. God says, are you any better than Thebes, who used the Nile as its boundary, as its defense? And another reference to the fact that these people used the Tigris as their defense. This is another reference, like that last one, to these short staccato verses, not verses, just little phrases. And just think for a minute of a battle. Think of a great battle of just people coming up against each other with chariot wheels smashing off and spears throwing and swords clashing. Woe to the city of blood, full of lies, full of plunder, never without victims, the crap of whips, the clatter of wheels, galloping horses, jolting chariots, charging cavalry, flashing swords, glittering spears, many casualties, piles of dead, bodies without number, people stumbling over corpses. This is typical poetic use for the last 3,000 years. They've done this. If you want to represent something which is sort of not even, something which is very full of turmoil and chaotic. And I've just lifted a couple of verses here out of Gerard Manley Hopkins' poem. It's a sonnet called Pied Beauty. Some of you might know it, maybe not. But I'm just going to try to move this a bit. Okay. This is what he says. It's a very beautiful sonnet, I think. He's talking about God's creation of things that are multicolored. All things counter, original, spare, strange, whatever's fickle, freckled, who knows how, with swift, slow, sweet, sour, dazzle, dim, he fathers forth whose beauty is past change. Praise him. And that again is deliberate. He's not using it this time to represent the chaos of battle, but he's using it to represent disorder. He's using it to represent even things that are mixed up and multicolored still represent God. And he's got things which are clearly opposites: swift, slow, sweet, sour, dazzling, dim. And these are deliberately set up to give you the order again of not an easy flow, but something which is all mixed up, which is what Nahum does as well. I'm going to try to... Every now and again, my PowerPoint gives up, which it has done now. Okay, let me see if I can do it. Okay. Are we back to the reading there?
It's not showing. Oh, it is.
Okay, we're right now. I'm sorry. We're okay. Okay, this is another verse out of what Joe just read. Because of the multitude of harlotries of the seductive harlot, the mistress of sorceries, who sells nations through her harlotries and families through her sorceries. I might be wrong, but I can't think of where that imagery has ever been used except for Israel. Israel was espoused to God at Sinai as his wife. And as you go through the Old Testament, especially through Jeremiah and Hosea, there is this emphasis on the harlotries of Israel, how Israel was unfaithful, how her harlotries brought her down. And here you've got exactly the same language. Why? The image of harlotry means, I think, someone who started out being, all good and clean, but then ends up in the pits. And yet we sort of say to ourselves, why would he say that about Assyria? Israel, sure. Israel starts out being espoused to God, and then she breaks her vows. But how come Assyria does that? And I'm wondering whether it's an allusion to Jonah. Remember that just, I don't know, maybe a century before, Jonah has been to this city and he's converted it. They become, at that time, they become the people of Yahweh. They repented and they took on God as their God. But by the time we get to this prophecy, they've deserted God, turned their back on him, just like Israel did. And I wonder whether that is the same sort of allusion. Okay, and so it goes. Now, here's an interesting little thing about Nahum. I'm going to try, I can't read that. I can't get to the first line. I wish I could move this thing. I can't. It's got a banner saying the meeting is being recorded. That's your fault, Robin. Anyway, no, it's all right. No, don't. I'm only joking. Please just leave it. No, I can't move the slide. So
it says the tomb of Nahum is supposedly inside the synagogue at Al-Kosh.
Yeah.
Thank you. And read the next line too, Joe.
Al-Kosh, go on, Joe.
Oh,
sorry,
Alkosh was
right.
abandoned by its Jewish population in 1948 when they were expelled, and the synagogue that purportedly houses the tomb is in a poor structural state to the extent that the tomb itself is in danger of destruction. You want me to keep going, John?
No, I will now. I'll take over.
Oh, okay, good.
The tomb underwent basic repairs in 1796. When all the Jews were compelled to leave Akkosh in 1948, the iron keys of the tomb were handed to a Chaldean man by the name of Sami Jahana. Few Jews visit the historic site, but this man continues to keep the promise he kept to his Jewish friends and looks after the tomb. A team of US and UK construction engineers is planning to save the tomb. Interesting story. Just one little side event. In 1948, all the Jews were expelled. That's ethnic cleansing. If you Google how many Jews there used to be in the Arab countries like Morocco, Algiers, Egypt, etc., there was like at least 60, 70,000 Jews, up to 100,000. After 1948, none. That's ethnic cleansing. They were either killed or expelled because that's when Israel was formed. That's the tomb of Nahum. Looks pretty lousy, but I'll show you a few more pictures. This is the inscription on the outside of the tomb in Hebrew, saying that this was the tomb of Nahum. Inside, there's like a sarcophagus. And I'm going to move my little tiles again. That thing there, surrounded by wire and with a greenish cover on it, is supposed to be the sarcophagus of Nahum. And see if I'm having trouble progressing again. Okay, there it is. Better picture. And hopefully that's where Nahum's bones are. Who knows? Okay. Judgment on Edom. Ro, would you like to read the first chapter, or the only chapter of Obadiah?
Yes, I will. This is the vision of Obadiah. Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom, we have heard a report from the Lord, and a messenger has been sent among the nations. Rise up, let us rise against her for battle. Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You shall be utterly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rock, in your lofty dwelling, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the ground? Though you soar aloft like the eagle, though your nest is set among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. If thieves come to you, if plunderers came by night, how you've been destroyed, would they not steal only enough for themselves? If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave gleanings? How Esau has been pillaged, his treasures sought out. All your allies have driven you to your border. Those at peace with you have deceived you. They prevailed against you. Those who eat your bread have set a trap beneath you. You have no understanding. Will I not on that day, declares the Lord, destroy the wise men out of Edom and understanding out of Mount Esau? And your mighty men shall be dismayed, O Teman, so that every man from Mount Esau will be cut off by slaughter. Because of the violence done to your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. But do not gloat over the day of your brother in the day of his misfortune. Do not rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their ruin. Do not boast in the day of distress. Do not enter the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Do not gloat over his disaster in the day of his calamity. Do not loot his wealth in the day of his calamity. Do not stand at the crossroads to cut off his fugitives. Do not hand over his survivors in the day of distress. For the day of the Lord is near upon all the nations. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return on your own head. For as you have drunk on my holy mountain, so all the nations shall drink continually. They shall drink and swallow, and shall be as though they had never been. But in Mount Zion there shall be those who escape, and it shall be holy. And the house of Jacob shall possess their own possessions. The house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the houses of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau stubble. They shall burn them and consume them, and there shall be no survivor for the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. Those of the Negev shall possess Mount Esau, and those of the Shephelah shall possess the land of the Philistines. They shall possess the land of Ephraim and the land of Samaria, and Benjamin shall possess Gilead. The exiles of this host of the people of Israel shall possess the land of the Canaanites as far as Zarephath. And the exiles of Jerusalem who are in Sepharad shall possess the cities of the Negev. Saviors shall go up to Mount Zion to rule Mount Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's.
Thank you, Ro. Excellent. Okay, again, it ends with a group of verses which are clearly in the future, when holiness will be on Mount Zion, and all of those people who are God's people will possess their enemies. Just a couple of things. We don't know who Obadiah was. We don't know where he came from. No lineage or king. It's normally you can identify a prophet by three things. Normally it's got a lineage, like somebody says Elisha, the son of Shaphat, so you know who the father is. Then it can be identified by their hometown, Elisha again from Obed-Meholah, or the king that they served. But Obadiah, we don't know anything about him at all. His name, which I can't read there, can you read that for me, Ro? Can you press your thing?
No, I can't read that.
Okay. Has it got anything there?
Obadiah, something, no.
No, okay, all right.
Servant of Yah, I think.
That's it, servant of Yah. Yes, exactly. I can't read it. Servant of Yah, which simply means whenever you see an end of a name in IAH, as in Isaiah and Jeremiah, it always means the name of God. So he's a servant of God. There are two possible dates for it. The first one is around about the time of Elijah, because there was a record of Edom rebelling against the people of Judah. Down here in 2 Kings 8, in the time of Jeroboam, Edom rebelled, so it could be that battle. The Jewish people like to take that one. They say that's their favorite. They reckon it was in that time, because that corresponds to Obadiah, the servant of the king Ahab, who worked with Elijah. Remember, Obadiah was the one who hid the prophets of the Lord by 50s in the caves. And the Jews like to pick that one. The other possibility is the Babylonian invasion, when the Babylonians came in and they took over. That's a later date. The reason I go for the later date, which I think most Christians would, is because when you read the whole thing, it doesn't read as though Edom is the main attacker. It reads as though Edom is simply sharing in the spoils. It says, when the enemies came into the gates of Jerusalem, Edom joined in. Well, obviously there were some other enemies. They weren't just Edom. And that sounds to me like it was Babylon that came in and Edom turned their back on their brother. Edom comes in for a special prophecy of destruction because Jacob was their brother. Unlike Moab and Ammon, who certainly had a connection through Terah, Edom or Esau was the brother of Jacob and therefore had a greater duty to protect and to help their brother, but they didn't, and therefore they come in for the same condemnation. Now, here's a couple of maps which we will probably refer to a bit again later. But this is the kingdom of Moab here. Sorry, Edom. Kingdom of Edom is here. And you'll see that it's at the bottom of the Dead Sea, in amongst the salt fields here. And if you look at a modern map, at the bottom of the Red Sea, it would put Edom as being partly Jordan and partly Israel. So Edom represents part of Jordan, part of Israel in modern parlance. And the last few verses clearly refer to the end times when it talks about holiness to the Lord, etc., on the mounts of Edom and where the people of Israel come. So it's an end time prophecy. This is just something that I think people always think of whenever you talk about Edom. People always think of these great, I get that, well, maybe they're temples that were at Petra, but that's probably not from the Edomites. I think it's from a group of people called Nabateans, who were sort of Arabic tribes who came in a bit after Edom. Edom would have probably, yeah, well, they were probably still around, but they certainly got called Idumeans by the time Jesus arrived. But they didn't have any strength at all, and other tribes had moved in. I've never been there. You can press your space bar if you want to. Has anybody ever been to Petra?
Yes, I have.
Half your luck.
Yes, it's absolutely magnificent looking.
I can imagine. It would be absolutely marvelous. Well, that's the place where they were. Probably didn't quite have buildings like that, but the Nabateans later decided to do that. This is a relief map which gives you some idea of why it keeps on talking about the heights. It keeps on saying, you who dwell in the clefts of the rocks, you who are on the heights of the mountains. And if you have a look, you'll see that down from the Red Sea, there's this mountain range running down here. And evidently the people of Edom felt they were fairly safe. If they were being attacked by an enemy, they would be able to take refuge in these mountains. And again, I'm going to end up not being able to read this. Oh, no, I can. Edom had a special relationship. Because they were the people of Esau, God had preserved them with a special blessing because they also were Abraham's children. God said in Deuteronomy 2, do not meddle with them, for I will not give you any of their land, no, not so much as one footstep, because I've given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. So that land was given, and had the people of Esau, or Mount Seir, or Edom, or Teman, whichever you like, they're all represented the same people, had they done the right thing and promised to follow God, then they would have been given their own possession and they would have been protected. In fact, if you look back early, they had some great heroes. If you look back to the time just after Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that's when we come to the story of Lot. Lot is all about Edomites, and they were magnificent people. Sorry, not Lot, Job. Sorry, Job. Job were Edomites, and Job was the most righteous man on the face of the earth. And so the message of God certainly was with Edom at the time. And here's the references to the rocks. Trying to move some of my tiles. Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom. We've heard a report from the Lord. Send an ambassador. Some versions say messenger, but that's not the Hebrew word, so probably ambassador is better. Sent among the nations, saying, arise, let us ride up against her for battle. The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who dwell in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high. You'll be brought down to the ground. You think you're high like an eagle, but you'll come crashing down. And so God basically is saying to them, even though you think you've surrounded yourself by impenetrable rocks, you will be destroyed. Okay, now I'm having problems in progressing again. Okay. For violence against your brother Jacob, shame will cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. In the day that you stood on the other side, in the day the strangers carried captive his forces, when foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, even you was one of them. This is why I think it's pretty clear that it's referring not to the time of Elijah and to the Obadiah, who was the friend of Elijah. It's referring to the captivity from Babylon because it clearly says strangers came and foreigners enter your gates, whereas the original, that first time in Elijah's time, would have just been Edom by themselves. But here, clearly, Edom is joining with someone else. Okay, so it's basically a prophecy because these people were God's people. They were given, just as Israel were given, they were given an inheritance, but they turned their back on God, like all of the others, like Moab and Ammon. They all turned their back on God, and so they lost their right to their inheritance. And I'm just going again to see if I can move on. I'm having problems. Okay. Just want to read this verse. I can't read the first line. Joe, do you want to do that again for me? Read the first line.
From verse 17, is that what you want, John?
Yeah, verse 17.
It says, but on Mount Zion there shall be deliverance, and there shall be holiness. The house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. And in verse 18, the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, but the house of Esau shall be stubble. They shall kindle them and devour them, and no survivor shall remain of the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. You want me to keep going, John, or not?
Yeah, keep going. Then.
Okay.
Thanks, Joe.
The south shall possess the mountains of Esau, and the lowland shall possess Philistia. They shall possess the fields of Ephraim and the fields of Samaria. Benjamin shall possess Gilead, and the captives of this host of the children of Israel shall possess the land of the Canaanites, as far as Zarephath. The captives of Jerusalem who are in Sepharad shall possess the cities of the south. Then saviours shall come to Mount Zion to judge the mountains of Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's.
Absolutely. That's clearly an end time prophecy. These verses are talking about the end time, when saviors will come to Mount Zion. It's talking about the restoration. And again, I love Galatians chapter 3. This is not about Israel. This is about God's people. And Galatians chapter 3 says that it is not Israel. Israel are not God's people now. God's people are those in Jesus Christ. Paul says, you are the ones with the promise. You are the ones who inherit what God has promised. And so this is a time when all of those people who love God will be brought together into his kingdom. And finally, here's a picture of all of those nations or those areas that were talked about at the end of Obadiah. First of all, he says Esau. Esau's will be stubble. And if you look where Esau was, you remember that Esau was down at the bottom of the Red Sea, and the Dead Sea, I should say, in this area here. This is the area down here, and you can see that it covers Jordan. Philistia. Philistia is the Gaza Strip. That is the part of Israel which is at war today. So there's the Gaza Strip. Samaria. Samaria is the West Bank. That's Samaria. Also in the chapter it's called Ephraim as well. Same area. That's the West Bank. So far it's named Jordan, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, Gilead. Gilead is also Jordan, this region here. And Zarephath, well, Zarephath is Hezbollah. Hezbollah is Zarephath because that's southern Lebanon. So all of these nations that are listed are at war with Israel today, except for Jordan. And I expect in the future that will happen. The actual ruling class of Jordan, the king, etc., they're okay with Israel. But the actual people of Jordan are quite furiously against Israel and want to support the Palestinians because many of them are Palestinians. After 1948, lots of the Palestinians fled into Jordan. And in fact, Jordan is, I don't know what percentage, but a very high percentage of Palestinians. So all of these nations around named at the end of Obadiah are all of the ones in the news today. Almost all of them. There's the people of Jordan, there's the West Bank, there's the Gaza Strip, there's Hezbollah, all of them. And they will all be a part of that final battle Zechariah 12 is my favorite, I think, to end with. Zechariah 12 says that when Jesus does come back to save his people, they will look on him whom they pierced, and they'll suddenly realize that he was the Messiah they rejected, and then all of those blessings will come to the people. And that's it, folks. Thank you. I will